Communication in relationships. Communication is generally one of the most undervalued insights or things that you can apply to solve issues, and especially in relationships. We make so many assumptions what the other person thinks, and because that certain behaviors imply certain things, we assume the other person, committed to us or loves us, etc. But we never actually ask, and we also don't express our own feelings, and then we believe that the other person knows what's going on in our mind. And it gets even worse across gender barriers, because we just express and value different things, in the kind of stereotypical gender roles, and they do apply to a certain extent. So what do I mean by communication? I mean expressing what you think and explaining it to the other person, rather than assuming they have to figure it out. That's kind of a recipe for disaster, because they won't figure it out, because they're looking through the world through their own eyes, through their own needs, through their own experiences. And so this not only applies to romantic relationships, but to any type of relationships. We have to understand that how we perceive the world and what is being said is a completely different filter than for other people. And basically that filter, or that kind of interpretation machine, has been created by your upbringing, by your experiences. So certain words will trigger you. Let's say school will evoke certain emotions in you that for another person will be completely different. For some people it might be the most beautiful time of their lives, and for others the most dreadful. So any word you say to another person will be completely different interpreted and trigger people in different ways, even if you mean super well. And of course, there's so many other, our whole body language, etc. We think it's very clear what we mean, because when we talk, we have something in our mind, and we believe that the other person receives it exactly the same way, but it doesn't. But she doesn't, or he doesn't. But it goes much deeper. It's not only that what we say is understood differently by another person, but it's also what we don't say, right? We make so many assumptions that it's clear what we feel, think, etc. But to the other person it is not, and how should it? They don't have a mind-reading machine, and frankly, we don't want them to have that, right? But so it's crucial that we are able to express ourselves. And so a healthy relationship of any kind, romantic, friendly, business-wise, thrives when you start expressing what's going on, what you expect, when you tell the other person what you want them to do, what you expect them to do, what you feel when they do certain things. You can't expect them to know it, and they might, in the best case, they might mean super well. They might give you some friendly advice, but that advice triggers you based on your past experiences. So then, in turn, you have to express what it does, because otherwise they might not notice. And the other way around as well. If you're giving advice, you have to anticipate how it might come across. It might be meant super well, but it might actually, you might put a knife directly into someone's wound, and it might hurt a lot without you having had the intention. So I think the appreciation that we all perceive the world very differently, and that we, beyond anticipating that we actually need to much more actively communicate our emotional side, our feelings, what we want, etc. We can't expect that others, if we let others do the work, or the people that we communicate do, then we have to assume that there will be misinterpretation. It's just, that's the most likely case. And even though we think we have been super clear, we're not. Other people speak a different language. And I can't stress that over enough. There's a book that I also recommend as one of the really easy entries into kind of spiritual understanding of oneself, which is called The 4 Agreements. And one of the 4 agreements is don't make any assumptions. Yet we make constantly assumptions when interacting with other people. Make assumptions what their behavior implies. We make assumptions what they meant, what they were saying, certain things. We make assumptions that we believe they understand where we are at in this relationship, when the other person might never have given an indication. We make assumptions if they don't do certain things that they don't mean certain things. For example, let's say I'm a guy in a relationship and I don't bring flowers every day, for certain girls that might mean I don't love them. While different people have different forms of expressing their love, right? Some want it to be in a material form, some want it to be in a kind of attention, form, some want it in a supportive and advice role, some want it in a more physical role, or a combination of all of those things. So we speak different languages, not just verbally, we attach different meanings to things, and we believe that, we often falsely believe that the other person has attaches the same meanings, but also we have different needs of how we convey emotions, like love or appreciation, and also we have different needs for depending on our upbringing and the lack of certain emotional support. So for example, if you never received love, then love for us is even more important to receive. If we were never good enough for our parents, or for, mostly it is related to early upbringing, for our parents or for our environment at an early age. For us, appreciation is much more and needs to be expressed much more explicitly. And so our role, your role, my role in relationships is to understand, realizing that whatever I say will come across differently, and so you have to both really learn to read the other person, and also ask as well as express yourself. It's a constant work, and actually it doesn't matter how long your relationship is. Sometimes it gets more important the later you go into it, because you kind of fall into certain routines and circles where and it just gets stuck. One person does certain things that triggers you in a certain way, and you're in repeat every day or every week or whenever. And so to break these patterns, you have to kind of like take a step back, look at the situation, why are we going constantly in the repeat, and kind of get to the bottom of the things, and not stay on the surface. The surface would be like, he says this and then she reacts that way. And so like, why does she react that way? Well, maybe that's exactly where you want to go down. And why does he always say this way? So you have to both look at yourself and really understand why you're doing certain things, why you're saying certain things, and understand why the other person is reacting. And you can do that exercise for yourself initially, but then you want to get into a dialogue. And a good relationship is a relationship of communication, where you're allowed to say what's going on, and sometimes these things are uncomfortable. And of course you have to work your way to that trusting relationship. You cannot just, after years of not having spoken what you think, suddenly you burst out all the things that you wanted to say for a decade. That doesn't work like that. You have to build the trust and, open up and start with your own vulnerability by sharing things that are difficult for you. And then that will invite the other person to do the same thing. But it is really important to have that active exchange and kind of move on from kind of making assumptions, and to express what your needs are, even if they're uncomfortable, because the reality is you're thinking them already anyway. So expressing them is just, manifesting them, making them explicit, and that's important for the other person to know where you're at, so they can react and adapt and kind of, adjust their behavior to your needs, or the things that you don't want or that trigger you, and can help you in that journey, rather than kind of keeping that friction and until the point where you break, and then you're going to burst it all out, and then the next step is like a breakup or a divorce. So the solution is just doing that, doing what I just described, but then doing it in a compassionate way, rather than pointing out, oh, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong. It's all about, it comes from a place of love, of wanting to work, and you have to really embody that and then express that as well. And if you do that, your relationship of any kind will take on a whole different level and meaning, and suddenly things that used to be so complicated will become very smooth, because suddenly it's like a dance of two people. Like if both are stiff and they're not talking to each other, it's going to be a very awkward dance. But once you kind of react very flexibly, and you show the other person where you're going next, etc., you're both leading and being led, then it becomes a beautiful and really simple dance. And so I encourage you, start being more active in communication. That especially applies to guys who kind of like, they don't talk, right? It's kind of the joke, but it's not really a joke. We don't talk. We're just inside, and we kind of process everything inside, but we need to talk to the other person. And once you start doing that, life will never be the same again.